Zane had always been considered ordinary. Short, thin, and with little muscle, he didn't look like someone who could protect anyone. People often scoffed at him, dismissing him as too small to be a bodyguard. But none of that mattered to him. He had trained for years, focusing on strategy, agility, and observation. He wasn't the strongest, but he was sharp, and he knew how to handle himself. His latest assignment was different from anything he had ever done before. He had been assigned to protect Lady Ceres, one of the most influential women in the colony. She was the heir to a powerful family, rich and politically connected, with a reputation for being tough and unapproachable. She had enemies everywhere, and the rumors about her were both frightening and fascinating. Zane had heard whispers that she was ruthless when it came to business, but kind to those she trusted. When he first walked into her estate, he was taken aback by how grand it was. The marble floors gleamed under the artificial light, and the air smelled of fresh flowers and expensive perfume. But Zane wasn't here to admire the beauty. He was here to keep Lady Ceres safe no matter what. He had been introduced to her in the formal sitting room, where she was seated like a queen on her throne, surrounded by luxurious cushions. Her gaze, sharp as a blade, scanned him as he approached. "You're too small to be my guard," she said coldly, not even bothering to stand up. The words stung, but Zane didn't show it. He had heard worse before. "I'm capable," Zane replied, trying to keep his voice steady. "I may not look like other bodyguards, but I've been trained to protect people in ways that others can't." Lady Ceres raised an eyebrow, clearly unimpressed. "We'll see," she muttered, turning her attention back to her datapad. It was clear that she didn't take him seriously. Zane's job was to stay close to her at all times, ensuring she was safe from any threats. But Lady Ceres didn't make it easy. She barely acknowledged his presence and went about her day as though he were invisible. Zane had expected as much. Protecting powerful people was rarely easy, especially when they thought they didn't need protection. The next morning, Zane's patience was tested again. He followed her through the grand hallways of her estate as she prepared for a meeting with some of the most influential figures in the colony. Despite the early hour, Ceres was already impeccably dressed, her posture perfect. She walked with the kind of confidence that made everyone in her path step aside. Zane stayed a few steps behind her, keeping an eye on the surroundings. He noticed the subtle glances of the other guards, all of whom seemed to have their doubts about him. They were tall, strong, and clearly more physically imposing than him. But Zane wasn't here to compete with them. His job wasn't to look strong. It was to think quickly and act decisively. The meeting room was a vast open space with a long, polished table at the center. A few of Ceres's colleagues were already seated, all of them towering over Zane. They barely looked at him as he entered, and one of them even snickered under his breath. Zane ignored them, instead focusing on Ceres, who was now seated at the head of the table, her posture as unyielding as ever. "Lady Ceres, we've arranged everything," one of the men said, speaking to her with a mixture of respect and fear. "But you must be careful. The situation is delicate." Ceres raised her hand, silencing him. "I know how to handle things. You all forget who you're dealing with," she said with quiet authority. "No one can outsmart me." Zane observed the tension in the room. There was something about the way the men spoke to her, something that made it clear they didn't entirely trust her. But Zane didn't get involved in politics. He was here to protect, not to question. The meeting continued, but Zane's attention was elsewhere. He kept his eyes on the door, the windows, and the shadows. There was something about the atmosphere that felt off, like danger was lurking just out of sight. As the meeting dragged on, Zane felt a growing unease. He had seen this before. People who thought they were invincible were often the first to fall. Suddenly, the calm atmosphere shattered. There was a loud crash from the hallway outside the room, followed by a flurry of movement. Before Zane could react, the door burst open, and several masked figures stormed into the room. The air filled with the sound of blaster fire as the figures opened fire on Ceres and the others. The guards immediately jumped to their feet, trying to shield Ceres, but Zane was already in motion. He knew that no one would expect him to act quickly, which gave him an edge. As one of the attackers fired at Ceres, Zane darted forward, knocking the blaster out of their hand before the shot could reach her. His training kicked in as he disarmed the next attacker, using their own momentum against them. Lady Ceres froze, her eyes wide in disbelief. Zane moved with such speed and precision that he seemed to vanish and reappear before her eyes, taking down the attackers one by one. The guards, who had initially mocked him, were now scrambling to protect themselves. Zane didn't pause to think. He was already 5 steps ahead, knowing exactly where to strike and when. It wasn't brute strength that made him effective. It was his knowledge of tactics, his ability to read the situation, and his quick reflexes. In just a few moments, all but one of the attackers had been neutralized. The last one, realizing they were outmatched, turned and tried to flee, but Zane was already on them. With a swift movement, he grabbed their arm, twisting it behind their back and forcing them to the ground. Within seconds, they were subdued and Zane had complete control of the situation. Lady Saris stood there shocked, her mouth slightly open. For a moment, there was silence in the room as everyone processed what had just happened. The attackers were either unconscious or restrained, and the guards had begun securing the area. But none of that mattered to Saris at the moment. All she could do was stare at Zane. You stopped them?" she asked, her voice barely above a whisper. Zane stood tall, his face calm but focused. "It's my job," he replied simply. The room was still, the only sounds coming from the guards securing the area and the faint hum of the lights above. For the first time, Zane saw the respect in Saris's eyes. She might not have believed in him before, but now she could see what he was capable of. And Zane, he just felt the quiet satisfaction of knowing he had done his job. There was still much to do, but for now Lady Saris was safe. Zane had expected trouble. He had known that protecting someone like Lady Saris wouldn't be easy, but what happened next surpassed even his worst fears. The chaos from the earlier attack had barely settled when the next wave of danger hit. Zane, still catching his breath from the fight, watched as Lady Saris walked to the front of the room, her composure never wavering. But her eyes were sharp, scanning the room for any sign of further threats. Zane wasn't sure if she was relieved or angry, maybe a little of both. "We need to leave now," Zane said quietly, approaching her. "This is far from over." Saris gave him a nod, her eyes still fixed on the guards securing the area. "You're right. But we can't just leave without making sure the others are safe." Zane wasn't surprised by her response. Lady Saris cared for her people, though she rarely showed it. But right now, the only thing that mattered was getting her out of the building and to safety. They had no idea how many more attackers were out there, or who had sent them. Zane moved quickly, assessing the situation with the sharpness of someone who had spent years anticipating threats. He motioned for Saris to follow him as they headed for a hidden emergency exit he knew about. It wasn't the most secure route, but it was the fastest. The two of them slipped through the narrow hallway, their footsteps barely making a sound. Zane kept his hand on his blaster, ready for anything. He knew that being quick was their best chance at survival. As they reached the emergency exit, Zane's instinct screamed that something was wrong. He paused, motioning for Saris to stop. The sound of distant footsteps reached his ears, too many to ignore. "They're here," Zane whispered. He could hear muffled voices now, too. The attackers were moving through the building, searching for Saris. They were getting closer. Zane's mind raced, calculating their next move. There wasn't enough time to get to the safe house he had in mind, but there was another option. He turned to Saris. "Stay close and keep quiet. We'll make a run for the back alley. I know a safe spot just outside." Saris nodded, her face serious now. She trusted him, finally. Zane didn't waste another moment. He led the way through the dimly lit corridors, his eyes scanning every corner and shadow for movement. Suddenly, the door ahead of them burst open with a loud crash. 2 masked figures appeared, blasters drawn and aimed directly at them. Zane acted without hesitation. He shoved Saris to the side, out of harm's way, and dove toward the attackers. One of the assailants fired, but Zane was already on top of them, using his small size and speed to his advantage. He knocked the blaster out of the attacker's hand and took control of the situation in seconds. Before the second assailant could react, Zane grabbed a metal pipe from the ground and swung it hard. It connected with the assailant's chest, knocking them back. Zane followed up with a quick move, disarming them and knocking them out cold. It all happened so fast that Saris barely had time to process it. Zane turned to her, breathing hard but focused. "We can't stay here. More are coming." Saris, still wide-eyed from the sudden attack, nodded. "Lead the way." The two of them continued their journey through the building, but the hallway seemed to stretch on forever. Every turn could bring more attackers. Every door could hide an enemy waiting to strike. Zane's heart raced, but he stayed calm, his every move calculated. They reached the back alley as planned, but there was no time to celebrate. As soon as they stepped into the open, Zane's sharp eyes spotted the next danger, 3 more assailants blocking their path. They were better armed this time, and they had a clear advantage in numbers. Zane pushed Saris behind him. "Stay down," he ordered. "I'll handle this," but Saris didn't listen. She had never been the type to hide behind others. She stepped forward, her eyes flashing with determination. "We're in this together." Zane hesitated for only a second, then nodded. They couldn't afford to waste time arguing. The first assailant raised his blaster and fired, but Zane was already moving. He darted to the side, narrowly avoiding the blast, and rushed toward the attackers with the speed of a predator. He grabbed the first assailant by the wrist, twisting their arm until the blaster fell to the ground. Without hesitation, Zane kicked them in the chest, sending them crashing to the ground. He didn't stop there. He moved on to the next attacker, using his environment to his advantage, ducking behind crates and barrels to avoid gunfire while taking down each opponent one by one. Saris watched in stunned silence as Zane disabled the attackers with swift, efficient moves. She had never seen anyone move like this before. His size meant nothing in the face of his speed, skill, and intelligence. He wasn't just reacting. He was thinking several steps ahead of them. The last assailant, realizing they were outmatched, tried to run, but Zane was too fast. He tackled them to the ground and swiftly knocked them out with a pressure point to the neck. The alley was silent once more, save for the heavy breathing of both Zane and Saris. Zane stood over the last assailant, panting but unshaken. "You okay?" he asked, turning to Saris. She was looking at him differently now, her gaze no longer filled with doubt or scorn. There was respect in her eyes, maybe even something deeper. She nodded slowly. "I'm fine." Zane scanned the area quickly. The danger wasn't over, but for now they had a moment to breathe. "We need to move quickly. There's more where that came from." Saris followed him without question this time. She had seen what he was capable of, and she wasn't about to slow him down. As they continued down the alley, Zane couldn't shake the feeling that this was only the beginning. Whoever was behind these attacks wasn't just trying to kill her. They were trying to break her, to make her crumble under the pressure. But Zane wasn't going to let that happen. He had a job to do, and he was going to do it well. No matter what it took. Zane and Saris didn't speak much as they moved through the winding alleyways of the city, their feet moving in rhythm as they kept their pace fast and steady. The night was quiet now, but Zane knew that wasn't a good thing. Silence meant the enemy was regrouping, waiting for the perfect moment to strike. Every step they took was one closer to danger, but they couldn't afford to slow down. Saris walked close behind him, her presence a constant reminder of why he was doing this. He'd been trained to protect people who needed saving. But Lady Saris wasn't just anyone. She was strong, intelligent, and had earned her place in the galaxy's elite. She didn't need saving in the traditional sense, but she needed someone who could see beyond her cold exterior, someone who could protect her in ways no one else could. The previous attacks had been a clear message. Someone wanted her gone, and they weren't going to stop until they succeeded. Zane had no illusions. This wasn't just about physical threats. It was about power, politics, and the ruthless forces behind her family's fortune. These enemies weren't just trying to kill her. They wanted to break her, make her submit to their will. As they reached a small safe house hidden beneath an abandoned warehouse, Zane stopped and gestured for Saris to stay back. He carefully checked the surroundings, ensuring no one had followed them. He knew the drill. Never let your guard down even for a second. "All right," he said quietly. "We're safe for now." "Stay close." Saris didn't respond immediately. Instead, she gave him a hard look, her eyes calculating. "You know," she said, her voice low, "I never imagined I'd end up here. Hiding like this, a noble woman reduced to running in the shadows." Zane didn't flinch at her words. He'd heard similar things before from people in positions of power who felt the weight of losing control. He understood. But he also knew that power didn't mean safety, and sometimes the strongest people had to fight from the shadows before they could reclaim what they had lost. "You don't have to like it," Zane said, his voice steady. "But this is temporary. We'll figure out who's behind this, and then we'll take them down." Saris didn't reply, but Zane saw the faintest flicker of appreciation in her eyes. She was strong, but even the strongest needed someone they could trust. She didn't have many people like that, Zane knew. His job was to make sure she never had to face this alone. Inside the safe house, Zane immediately set to work. He activated the security system, locking down the entrances and securing the perimeter. Then he moved to a desk in the corner, pulling up a series of encrypted files on his datapad. The information he had gathered was still scattered and incomplete, but he had learned one thing. These attacks weren't random. They were part of a larger scheme. Saris, meanwhile, paced around the room, clearly uneasy. It was unlike her to be vulnerable, but Zane could see it now. She was unraveling just a little. The idea of losing control of being hunted was something she had never had to face before. She was used to being in charge, and now that was slipping through her fingers. "What's the next move?" she asked, breaking the silence. Zane didn't look up from his screen. "We keep moving. We'll track the people behind these attacks, find out who's pulling the strings, but for now we need to rest. We've been on the run for hours." Saris hesitated, then nodded. "Fine, but we can't afford to stay here long. I know how these people think. They won't stop until they've neutralized every threat, and that includes you." Zane paused, his fingers hovering over the datapad. He knew she was right. But there was something about her words that struck him. Lady Saris, for all her strength, had just acknowledged the danger, the vulnerability. She was human, just like him, and that was something he had to remember. "We'll be ready," Zane said, finally looking up at her. "I've got a plan." The next few hours passed in silence, the only sound the soft hum of the safe house's security system. Zane spent most of his time reviewing the data he had collected, piecing together the fragments of information. The attackers, he had learned, weren't random mercenaries or rogue operatives. They were well-organized, trained professionals. And they were linked to a powerful faction within Saris's family's rivals. People who wanted her out of the picture. "They're not just after you, Lady Saris," Zane muttered to himself, scrolling through the files. "They want to send a message, and you're the target." Saris approached the desk, glancing over his shoulder. "What do you mean?" "These attacks are planned," Zane explained. "And they're escalating. They want you to feel powerless, to break. But you can't let them. You've been in charge for too long to let them take that away from you." Saris didn't respond at first. She stood there processing his words. Then, after a long pause, she spoke. "Maybe you're right," she said quietly. "Maybe I've been too focused on my position, my power. But I can't lose it, Zane. I can't let them win." Zane stood, his voice calm but firm. "You're not alone in this. We fight back together. We don't let them break us." For a moment, there was silence between them. Then Sarah stepped forward, placing a hand on the desk. "I'll trust you," she said softly. "I'll follow your lead. Let's do this." Zane felt a surge of determination. He had always known his role, his duty, but this moment felt different. It wasn't just about protecting her anymore. It was about standing together, about showing the world that humanity, no matter how small or seemingly insignificant, had the power to fight back against the forces that tried to crush them. Later that night, they made their move. Zane's plan was simple: track the enemy's communications, intercept their messages, and follow the trail back to their leader. It was a dangerous gamble, but they didn't have many options left. They slipped through the darkened streets, moving with purpose. Zane stayed in the lead, his senses sharp as ever, while Saris kept close behind. For once, she wasn't the one in control, and she seemed to accept it. There was an unspoken trust now, a bond forged in the heat of battle. As they neared their destination, Zane's heart began to race. He had never been so close to uncovering the truth. They were almost there, just a few more steps, and the answers they needed would be within reach. But Zane knew that the moment they made contact, the real fight would begin. And this time, they couldn't afford to lose.